Weber concedes the point that sometimes charismatic power is projected upon the leader and then it is retracted. Great leaders are, according to Weber, created by their followers. Charismatic leadership exists in its pure form only for a short period and had to adjust to the reassertion of the demands of everyday life. The need to adjust to everyday life involves the routinization of charisma. The first major problem comes with the succession, and Weber argues that there is a special relationship between charismatic and traditional authority when the question of succession comes in. Since both, that is, the charismatic authority as well as traditional authority, are invested in a particular person rather than a set of rules. A new leader has to be designated, possibly on the basis of charismatic properties that he or she is thought to possess, or he or she is appointed by the original leader. The further we get away from the original leader, the further we are from the unique quality of pure charisma. As charisma is passed on but becomes second hand, as a result, less powerful. Charismatic leadership, if it is to be preserved, it must transform itself to the demands of everyday life. On the other hand, when it transforms itself, the charisma begins to fade. Another crucial problem is that the disciples becomes Another crucial problem is that the disciples themselves wish to ensure their own power and position, which is threatened by the instability of the charismatic leadership of just one person. This pursuit of self-interest becomes easier if the charisma is somehow lifted from its original leader and attached to a position or to a family, this is effectively what had happened according to Weber in the Roman Catholic Church, and it is also a basis for the British monarchy. Charisma can be inherited, for example, in the monarchy, or passed on by ceremony, for example, in the Roman Catholic Church, and it can be also passed by education or training of the successor. Familial charisma ensures only succession, but institutional charisma takes on a lasting power as an organization which can act as a balance to secular power. The routinization of charisma is an institutional form. It involves the emergence of priests as a distinct status group, making universalistic claims to dominate over and above the claims of family, and as time goes on, the nation as well. A body of knowledge, for example, theology, grows up and is taught to new entrants. The priesthood hold on to their privilege of interpreting the word of God to their followers, and new charismatic leaders are resisted. Monastic orders are often a threat to the church because they embody the way of life of the original charismatic leader, renouncing the world. The monk is a model religious person, perhaps the first proper professional of the Western world, according to Max Weber. Then Weber spends a lot of time discussing the relationship between secular and religious power, a competition which continues today in all sorts of interesting ways. Now, here the term secular and religious is purely in the context of European Christianity, and primarily Weber is relying on the data from Germany, England, France, and United States of America. For example, in the USA, charismatic religious leaders offer a challenge to the federal government, particularly when that government is dominated by the Democrats. Weber is writing before 1920 because in 1920 he had died. Therefore, he is referring to old data. And in the UK, the relationship between the Church of England, an established church supported by the state, had moved from a very close connection with the ruling party in the first part of the 19th century as well as 20th century. He was referring to first part of the 20th century uh, before his death, but his older data is related with 19th century. I will read this sentence again. And in the UK, the relationship between UK, United Kingdom, and in the UK, the relationship between the Church of England, it is called Anglican Church, unlike the Protestant Church, uh, Roman Catholic Church, or Greek or Russian Orthodox Church. This is another type of church, Anglican Church. Uh, Between the Church of England, an established church supported by the state had moved from a very close connection with the ruling party in the first part of the century. Now, Weaver points out that for most of the time, a compromise is reached between the secular power represented by the state or monarchy and the charismatic power or religious power represented by the Church of England. Each power needs the other. The church can supply ideological justification for the state, whilst the state can protect the church. Here you find a very strong similarity between Marx and Weber. Uh, some people have tried to discover a theory of historical development in Weber's work. For example, Reinhard Benedict's, Frank Parkin, and Ian Crabb. The three have debated this theory of historical development in Max Weber's work on leadership and authority. One view is that charismatic leadership pushes forward social change, or it provides a bridge between traditional and rational legal forms of domination. Reinhard Benedict says that this is a mistaken view. On the other hand, Jan Crabb thinks that this is a strong possibility. If the social order is inherently unstable, then charismatic leaders can arise at any time. Frank Parkin seems to think that Weber underestimated the likelihood of charisma transforming a legal, rational society. Parkin in 1982 and Benedict in 1966 and Ian Crabb in 1990s. They are debating the case, and Parkin, takes the case of Hitler as a charismatic leader, which is a very important case in contrast to Jesus Christ. A charismatic leader on his own doorstep would revolutionize an entire society and its rational structure to the most devastating irrational purposes. For example, Hitler was not just a product of his own charisma or his own powers or of the disorder of the Weimar Republic of Germany. He was much more the product of the belief that the German people placed in Hitler's offer of an easy target to blame for their troubles and their surrender of their own powers to him. In my view, so far as traditional power or traditional leadership is concerned, Weber relied primarily in a popular view prevalent in Europe. It is known as the divine right of king to rule over his citizens or her citizens. And so far as Weberian data is concerned, it is primarily European. But for Asia, he relies on Max Muller and William Jones. Usually, William Jones is regarded as an Indologist, and Max Muller is regarded as an Orientalist. But Weber presents the data about traditional leadership in his own style, about traditional leadership or traditional authority or traditional domination. Weber says that the pure form of traditional domination is patriarchalism, or the dominance of the father over the household. Here he is primarily referring to the Bible and the European medieval period, but very thoughtlessly he extends this argument to the non-European context, primarily to Asia, which is full of errors. Weber says that in the medieval Europe, we find two types of traditional leadership. One is called patriarchalism, and the second is called feudalism. In the case of the first, that is patriarchalism, the father or the patriarch of the household or the master in the feudal establishment, the master has the absolute control, or the master's will is absolute, and it is not limited by law, it is limited only by tradition. But once these rights are written down, they become more limited than when the master simply had to ensure the goodwill of his dependents. The result of this extension is from patriarchalism to patrimonialism. He says that there is a shift from patriarchalism to patrimonialism to feudalism. Let us see. Patrimonialism existed in the despotic regimes of Asian. This is very, very objectionable. But then he says it also existed in European medieval society. We can accept this as social fact. The administration of the medieval society in Europe is bound up closely with the administration of the household. The further extended these regimes become, the more decentralized they tend to become, perhaps with rights and duties to be determined by independent courts. He's talking about medieval courts in Europe. But on the whole, power remains personal and office holders become office holders through connections, favors, promises, and privileges. Marx calls this crony capitalism, and this feature of traditional leadership or domination is still present in almost all societies today. Office holders become office holders through connections, favors, promises, and privileges, not only in countries like India, but also in countries like Russia and the United States of America. Such regimes are inherently unstable and they can suddenly disappear. Patrimonial domination can develop through the use of military force as personal instrument. This point is terribly important. Patrimonial domination can develop through the use of military force as a personal instrument. If administrators are appointed, they can come to form a status group that can contest power with a central authority, perhaps like the barons who forced King John to sign the Magna Carta, or they can be pawns in the struggles between central authorities. Magna Carta is very important political development in Western Europe, particularly in France, but it had, all European implications. Particularly when the officials are celibate clergymen who do not have a family interest of their own and who can be kept in order by the promise of pension. Weber suggests that feudalism is second variety of patriarchalism. The first is patrimonialism. In a feudal system, the nobility are united by a sense of a status honor, often producing conflict between monarchy and nobility. To balance the power of the nobility, the monarchy created local notables which developed a strong sense of its own status honor. It is the development of a distinct status honor that takes us into feudalism. This is a very important point. It is the development of a distinct status honor that takes us into feudalism from patriarchalism. The paternal authority of the master is replaced by a contractual relationship. The existence of a contractual relationship means that rights and duties are more formalized than in patrimonial systems. The military becomes important when the feudal lord finds it necessary to raise a cavalry equipped with horse and armor like his own. This becomes a military elite in fief to the lord, which, unlike patrimonial authority, can dispense with the goodwill of its subjects. Whereas education in patrimonial regimes, education or professional training in patrimonial regimes tended towards preparation for the administrative service. Education under is for martial skills or martial arts and aristocratic honor and non-challenge. The peasantry in Europe have been a silent witness to all the power struggles between the lords and their officials and knights. About rational legal or legal rational leadership and authority, Weber says that there are four defining characteristics of the modern state. First, it has a legal and administrative order which is subject to change by legislation, not by the whim of a lord or the dictate of a charismatic leader. Secondly, it has an administration which works in accordance with legislation, civil servants, and the judiciary do not make up their own rules but implement those formed by the legislature. The state has binding authority of all its members. Membership is usually not by birth, rather, it is by election or appointment. And the state acts are carried out in its territory. Finally, it can use force if that is legally prescribed or permitted by the constitution of the state. Modern state is legitimate if people believe in its legitimacy or validity or as morally acceptable. This is the meaning of legitimacy. And as with other forms of authority or domination or leadership, Uh, Laws are legitimate if they are enacted according to the law of the land enshrined in the Constitution. Each system justifies itself. Traditional authority is justified by tradition. Charismatic authority is justified by charisma. And the legal rational authority is justified by the written constitution. There is no overall or superior set of values by means of which we choose better or worse systems. We cannot choose between the three on any rational grounds, and each can be justified only on its own grounds. This is primarily the Weberian concept of rational legal domination. Uh, Here also we find a very important similarity between Marx and Weber. Both regarded European feudalism, which was based on written contracts between the concerned party, as the link between medieval age and modern age. In other words, both regarded feudalism as progressive from the divine right of kingship, which was represented by the Holy Roman Empire during the medieval Europe, primarily from the 4th century AD to 16th or 17th century AD. This idea of divine right of kingship represented patrimonial or patriarchal authority or domination of the patriarch or the king as the father figure of the entire nation. Both Marx and Weber regarded feudalism as slightly better and more progressive than the traditional regime of the medieval Europe. Now, logically, the legal rational or rational legal leadership is a product of the two important tendencies represented by feudalism. On the one hand, you have military training, which consists of martial arts and very strict regime of discipline. On the other hand, development of some sort of rational legal bureaucracy, which emerged out of the second tendency which Weber outlined, that is education. Therefore, what is rational legal authority for Weber? The non-military leadership which emerged at the advanced stage of feudalism, roughly around 16th to 18th century. In other words, these two factors, the military training versus the civil education, led to the two polar opposition of civil society and the military society, about which we had discussed earlier. Therefore, Uh, the rational legal authority in modern world, I am not restricting myself to Weber's work, which relies upon data until 1914 to 18. Uh, if we extend this data, this Weberian data about growth of modernity from the womb of highly developed feudalism, then we have two tendencies. One leads to traditional authority found in the army of any democratic, industrially advanced country. And second is the rational legal bureaucracy represented by not only, I'm taking the Indian example, of the Indian Administrative Service or IAS or Indian Police Service or IPS or Indian Forest Service or IFS or Indian Forest Service or Income Tax and Customs Service. But rational legal authority will also include the legal courts from district courts to the Supreme Court, and it will include not only the judges but also the advocates, both the government advocates and the freelance advocates, as part of the rational legal authority of the state. Uh, as you know, in India, the constitution has devised three types of authority: the legislative authority, the executive authority, and the judicial authority. And all three authorities are, supremely represented by the President of India, who is elected by all the elected members of parliament and members of legislative assemblies, as well as members of the Rajya Sabha. Therefore, rational legal bureaucracy in India is not restricted only to the bureaucrats who emerge out of the all India, competitive service, for example, UPSC in India. But rational legal or legal rational bureaucracy will also include, elected members of parliament or assemblies. On the other hand, the military will represent the traditional authority or traditional leadership, because they follow the same type of command which was followed by the medieval European feudal systems. Now, what about charismatic authority? Yes, charismatic authority, come up from time to time. For example, Mahatma Gandhi before independence, Jawaharlal Nehru, Indira Gandhi, नरेंद्र मोदी और अटल बिहारी वाजपेयी और ज्योति बसु और जयललिता और M.G. Ramchandran later on. As Weber was saying that charismatic leaders have inherent quality which are some sort of supernatural quality, and it is because of their supernatural quality or uncommon quality, or their uncommon enthusiasm to represent a particular type of interest group, that makes a charismatic leader. But as I said earlier, Marx does not think that charismatic leaders are always people of inherently superior quality. Rather, they get charismahood because they personify neglected interest groups like peasantry and lumpen proletariat and others. They were neglected in France when Louis Bonaparte, you know, uh, saw an opportunity for a coup, military coup, and he occupied the throne in the name of representing peasantry, lumpen proletariat, and others who are not happy with the existing political regime. Now, this is one view of charisma, whereas the Durkheimian view of charisma is also different from the view represented by Weber as well as by Karl Marx. Durkheim thinks that charismatic leader represent the collective representation or the sacred, and they also represent collective effervescence or collective conscience or collective uh, sentiments. In case we apply this to the contemporary situation, particularly in India, we can say that Jawaharlal Nehru and Mahatma Gandhi, they were definitely charismatic leaders of their time. Mahatma Gandhi uh, falls in the pure category of charismatic leader, but Jawaharlal Nehru was also a charismatic leader, although of a lesser degree. Jawaharlal Nehru will come to the degree to which Atal Bihari Vajpayee represented charisma. Now, Narendra Modi is a very difficult figure to classify. Uh, of course, to his poor voters, he is a demigod. He represents some sort of supernatural qualities in him. But for sociologists like me, Narendra Modi's charisma is something which can be explained by both the Durkheimian concept of charisma, where he represents the collective sentiments of the majority community, that is the Hindu community. Marx will say that he represented the OBC. He is the first OBC Prime Minister of India. Therefore, unlike the others before him, not only Jawaharlal Nehru and Lal Bahadur Shastri and Indira Gandhi and Morarji Desai, Jawaharlal Nehru was a Brahmin, Indira Gandhi was her daughter, Lal Bahadur Shastri was from a upper caste community from the largest electorate of India, that is Uttar Pradesh. Morarji Desai was a Brahmin from Gujarat. Chaudhary Charan Singh was an upper caste Jat from Uttar Pradesh. Then, after Chaudhary Charan Singh, Indira Gandhi succeeded. She was the daughter of Jawaharlal Nehru, and she became a charismatic leader after she won the war of 1971 with Pakistan. Although Nehru was defeated in 1962 by China, and after the defeat, some of the charisma of Nehru was dented, and out of the shock of this defeat, he died in 1964. Shastri succeeded Jawaharlal Nehru the way Narasimha Rao succeeded uh, Rajiv Gandhi, because he was assassinated. Narasimha Rao was a compromise candidate, so was Lal Bahadur Shastri. The case of Indira Gandhi is interesting. If we follow the Weberian terminology, she did not have power. When Lal Bahadur Shastri died in 66 in a very mysterious circumstances, but she had Weberian status, not because she was the daughter of Jawaharlal Nehru, and she was also the president of the All India National Congress in 1957, when she ordered, or rather, when she demanded from the Prime Minister of India, who was the father of Indira Gandhi in personal life, that the uh, legally elected government of left front in Kerala in 1957, this government should be destabilized, president rule should be imposed by disregarding the legitimate claim of EMS Namboodiripad as the Chief Minister of Kerala in 1957. Kerala was the first state in India in 1957 which saw the victory of another party by defeating the ruling party, Indian National Congress. It was undivided Communist Party of India in 1957. But EMS Namboodiripad was also a Brahmin like Jawaharlal Nehru or Indira Gandhi. Therefore, Indira Gandhi became Prime Minister of India in 1966. She had no power. She was neither a charismatic leader until then, like her father, nor she was the senior most leader of the Congress bureaucracy, that was Kamaraj Nadar, the then president of the Congress party, or it was Morarji Desai, the most popular Congress leader who wanted to succeed Jawaharlal Nehru in 66. His claim was not entertained by Kamaraj Nadar and his coterie, including the charismatic leader or the patron of the Congress party, Vinoba Bhave. But definitely she had a status, she had the nobility, that both are Weberian terms for status. Therefore, she came from a status group. She did not have power either in the Congress party to be elected as the leader or the Prime Minister of India, but she had status or nobility or cultural capital to borrow from Bordu. Now the same can be said about Sonia Gandhi. But what about Lalu Prasad Yadav. When he became Chief Minister of Bihar in 1990, he was definitely an underdog. He was not the charismatic leader. He was not even the senior most party of the Janata Dal. But once he became the Chief Minister of Chief Minister of Bihar, and Lal Krishna Advani sat on the Somnath Ayodhya Rath Yatra. He began his journey from Somnath in Gujarat and wanted to reach to Ayodhya in UP. Lalu Prasad Yadav arrested Lal Krishna Advani in the way from Gujarat to Ayodhya at a place called Samastipur. It was, an act of courage, and from that onwards, he started becoming a charismatic leader, an opponent of Lal Krishna Advani. Then the Congress leadership was in tatters. I am talking about 1990. VP Singh government was replaced by Chandrasekhar government, which was supported by the Congress party led by Rajiv Gandhi. But Rajiv's charisma was dented because of Bofors scam, and also because of his decision to open the Babri Mosque for the worship of the Hindus. His image was also dented because of his act in Parliament, which nullified the Supreme Court judgment in the Shah Banu case. What I wanted to stress at the moment is that Marxian concept of charisma is also very useful, and I will call Marx, Weber, and Durkheim. They have three concepts of charisma, and all the three are complementary to each other. They give rise to three types of charismatic authority. Durkheimian charisma is represented by Mahatma Gandhi in India, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah in Pakistan. Then we have another type of charisma represented by Max Weber, which is there in Indira Gandhi of 1971. In 1966, when she was made the Prime Minister of India, she was called Mom Ki Gudiya, the doll of wax, who had no power, which had no authority, and who was supposed to play at the hands of Kamaraj Nadar and Vinoba Bhave. But by 1969, she emerged as a fox. I am using Wilfred Pareto, the Italian sociologist. He said that there are two types of leaders and not three, as Max Weber was saying. Max Weber had charismatic leaders, traditional leaders, and rational legal leaders. Wilfred Pareto has two types of leaders, the lions and the foxes. The lions are charismatic leaders of Max Weber, or they are equivalent of charismatic leader of Max Weber. Whereas foxes of charismatic leaders of Marxist variety, for example, Louis Bonaparte was a fox in the language of Wilfred Pareto, but he was a charismatic leader in the understanding of Karl Marx. Now what about Manmohan Singh, Jyoti Basu and Nitish Kumar? They represent rational legal leaders. They are not leaders like Louis Bonaparte or Indira Gandhi of 1969. They are also not leaders like VP Singh of 1989. VP Singh became a prime minister, although it was Chaudhry Devilal, a Jat leader of Haryana, who had the maximum number of support in the Janata Dal, the party to which he belonged. But the Machiavellian VP Singh or the Fox VP Singh, Azad the Crown, became the prime minister by a very, very, Foxian method. Therefore, we have three types of charismatic leaders. Now, the one type of leader, which was Indira Gandhi in 1966 or even 1969, may be called, a fox, according to Wilfred Pareto. But in the language of Max Weber, Indira Gandhi represented a status group or nobility in the Congress party. So is Sonia Gandhi. Now, Sonia Gandhi will be also called a fox by somebody who is following Wilfred Pareto political sociology. Thank you.